How are you doing right now?
I'm fine, thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming, and we'll start right now. How did you start working for the Orioles, and what was your introduction to Edward Bennett Williams?
Yeah, so I actually, technically, I never really worked for the Orioles. I worked for him. So I met Ed Williams. I graduated from Georgetown in 1978, and was pretty active in campus ministries on campus. And when school came to an end, and I went into the working world, and I started working at Arthur Anderson, I joined the church right outside the gates of Georgetown University. And it was through that interface over the years that I met Ed Williams. He was a parishioner there. I became a parishioner there. We became friends. But I was somewhat naive and a little bit unaware of everything he was. I know he was a big guy, and he used to read off the altar, and nobody could read like Ed because he was just magnanimous and all of that. But he asked me one day to come to his office on a Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock. And I actually thought, that's how naive it was, I thought I was going to get some Redskin tickets. It was great. I'm going to a football game, right? And at that point, I was 25 years old, and he offered me a job. And I was a little taken back about that, and kind of babbled and stumbled, and ultimately accepted. And I started at 7:30 the next morning, which would be Saturday. And that was how the tempo began, and it never stopped.
Was that your first job, or had you already been working?
No, I was, at that point, I had worked for Arthur Anderson and Company, which is now gone, but it was a major CPA firm. I had passed the CPA exam, so I was a certified public accountant, which became my talent over the years. I knew the numbers much better than the lawyers knew the numbers, and they knew the law better than I knew the numbers, the law. So that's how it kind of came to be.
So you said you worked for Edward Bennett Williams and not the Orioles. What do you mean by that?
I was never, like, the Orioles had a structure, right? They had a ticket manager and an accounting function and the scouts and this, that, and the other thing. But I worked for the holding company that owned the Orioles, if you would. It owned a lot of other things, but I was, I was a major presence, and anything financial that went on over those years had to come through me and through my fingers, if you would.
So I assume you went to Memorial Stadium, you saw it.
A lot.
Could you describe what it was like?
Well, at the time, you got to put it in the context, right? So I started working in '81, so it would have been '82, would have been the first baseball season. And my experience as a baseball fan growing up in New York was the old Shea Stadium, kind of dilapidated Yankee Stadium, and Memorial Stadium. It was fine. It was well maintained. It was clean. It was safe. I was always impressed with the fact that the police department actually was inside the stadium, not just outside the stadium, and that led to a safer, more family-friendly environment. But it wasn't until a few years went by when the stadium construction process across the country got underway that you kind of started seeing the shortcomings in Memorial Stadium.
So what were those shortcomings? Was it because of just being a multi-purpose kind of stadium sharing with the Colts at the time?
That never really got in our way. I mean, it was multi-purpose, so you didn't have the perfect sight angles you would like in a baseball-only facility. But it was really the facilities itself, the locker rooms. Henry Peters, the general manager, had an office that was about a 2x4 with a desk in it. They were just lacking in a lot of amenities. And then you found, as technology evolved, you didn't have the back of the house things that you needed to make the money on game day, right? So if you were in a state-of-the-art ballpark today, they have central systems, like one keg room to pump the beer all over the place. Memorial Stadium had none of that, right? You had to roll the kegs and lots of the mess that went with that, the time, the labor, et cetera. So it was fairly inefficient, and it became more and more apparent to us that was the case as time went by.
So I assume, did you have an office in Memorial Stadium, or were you working outside of there?
I ultimately had an office in Memorial Stadium, but that came after Mayor Schaefer built an office building and attached it to Memorial Stadium to satisfy some of our concerns. But that was in the later years. Early on, I did not.
So what was working with Edward Bennett Williams like?
Yeah.
What was something about him that, like, you know, most people wouldn't know just from reading about him?
Yeah. So I've been asked this question some, and I've thought about it a lot. He had some interesting ways about him. He was obviously brilliant, obviously a great orator, but he had a photographic memory. And he wouldn't be the only person on earth you could say that about, but the way he used it, to me, was really important, because he remembered everyone's name, and it made it his business. He would go to the courthouse, he would know the clerks, he would know the bailiff, he would know the parking attendant. He would go up to the stadium, he would know the police officers inside, the ticket takers, by name. And I remember being in San Diego with him once, early one morning, and a fellow came up to him very shyly and said to him, "Mr. Williams, excuse me," and he knew, boom, who he was. He was an assistant equipment manager for the Redskins back in whatever, right? And when he had that, not just the photographic memory, remember all those names, but he had the ability, particularly for those that work closely with him, to make you think that he believed in you. And I'm now just about retired, and I've only come across one or two people in my life that could do that.
Yeah. What was like going to a game with him?
Oh, he was into it. He was, you weren't talking about the weather. You were talking about the game. He knew the players. He knew, the history behind it. It was not relaxing. Let's put it that way. So I'll tell you an anecdote. I've been married now for 41 years, but when I was dating Liz, her uncle had played Major League Baseball and played Danny O'Connell. I think he played for the Washington Senators at one point and for the Milwaukee, probably Braves at one point. So she grew up knowing baseball. And Ed's wife and his 3 daughters could really care less about baseball. So I took Liz to a game to introduce her to Ed. So we were in the old owner's box at Memorial Stadium, which wasn't very glamorous at all. And we were sitting in the front row, and Ed was on the left, and I was on the right, and Liz was in the center, and she was nervous as can be. So she reached down, and she started scoring the game, batter by batter, with all the little, hieroglyphics that go with doing that. He was like, he couldn't believe it. He said, you actually found a woman that can score a baseball game. So they were buddies instantly after that. And but he was, hanging around with him at a game was not something you did casually.
Would he like heckle the players of the opposing team, or
No. He was very reserved about that. He was not. Certainly cheer a home run, that type of thing, but not. No.
Yeah. So, in kind of moving a little forward, getting into the latter part of his years, unfortunately, with his health kind of struggles, how did that kind of impact the vibe around, just the team, especially with kind of like all the political struggles of getting a new baseball park?
He never let that get in his way. It was remarkable. He died of colon cancer that had metastasized on his liver after paying a long visit to his lungs. And he was never not sick when I knew him, but he never let that get in the way. And I mean, having surgery on Monday and being back in the office Thursday afternoon, that type of thing. I think in the end, and we're jumping ahead to the end, it impacted him that he wanted it resolved. He was never going to move the Orioles. So you can take all the buzz and the gossip and the newspaper articles, that was never going to happen. But he wanted to have a home for the team solidified. And that became a little bit more urgent as his walls began to close in, if you would. So
there's obviously at the time in all the newspapers a lot of fuss about him being from DC,
yeah.
and Baltimore fans having the Colts just leaving their they're kind of like shell shocked. So was there really no like real conversations about moving the team?
Sincerely, no, but we had those conversations because I think you'd be reckless not to have them. You listen to what people had to say. But I think this whole thing goes back to, and you touched on it, when the Colts left. I have to get my calendar out. I think that was 84, 5, something like that. William Donald Schaefer, the then mayor of the city, had lost an NBA team. He had then lost an NFL team, and he was determined he was not going to lose the baseball team. So we were living at Memorial Stadium on a 2-year lease, which became a 1-year lease, and it always had an evergreen option. And that was something that I think kept His Honor up at night, worrying about it. Even though we never extended that lease beyond a year, I think the notion was that if we signed a 20-year lease at Memorial Stadium, it'd be 19 years before the mayor called us back. So we played off that leverage. So there were a couple things that happened there. There was the day in Annapolis when Mr. Williams went and testified in front of, I think, the Finance Committee. You'd have to correct me if I'm wrong about that, but I think it was the Finance Committee. That was kind of a day where it was apparent that there was more than just the mayor that was concerned about this, that the rest of the state was keenly concerned about this. And it also came on the heels of a meeting that I don't think was ever put in the paper, but we had a meeting with, so the Colts left in '84. This would have been in like the February, March of '86, perhaps. We had a meeting at Martin's Airport with Mayor Schaefer, Governor Hughes, Art Modell, Al Lerner, and Ed Williams. Larry Lucchino and I were there too. And the whole notion was, so Modell was a client of Williams, having nothing to do with football. So they knew each other. And Art had proposed this idea that we get together, we throw the teams into a pool, we create this new stadium complex. I'll move from Cleveland, you know. And again, it was something we thought was like, all right, but given his relationship with Ed as a lawyer, and the fact that we owed it to hear what everybody had to say. So we went to this meeting. It completely fell apart because the governor and the mayor hated each other. So the thing's just like, it never got off the dime. But it was the first time I actually saw that there was a real appetite on the state and the city's part to make something happen.
So for that meeting, were they discussing like a site at Camden Yards or just another multi-sports facility somewhere around the Baltimore area?
That particular day, the focus was on a site on I-95, which you would call today Conterra. WSSC has a big building there at the exit, so it's more on the Washington side of the corridor, but the idea was to put it all there. And again, it never got off the idea phase. That was just an idea. But the fact that you could attract the mayor and the governor, who weren't the best of friends, into a meeting about that subject made us realize very quickly that there was a serious appetite to make something happen.
So we actually have the video of that finance committee hearing in '87 in Annapolis, and we watched some of it. But we also read the story, or kind of the legend, of the fact that Schaefer pretty much called Williams really the day before, and the story was that Williams was actually having chemo at the time, and Schaefer said, "You need to arrive here the next day to testify." Was that true, or is that kind of all legend?
I don't know the answer to that. It certainly would have some legs in terms of my memory, because that was clearly the time that Ed was laboring through one of his cancer treatments. I can't tell you if it was a 24-hour turnaround or not. I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if it was, but I don't know the answer.
Were you involved with any of the legislature in Annapolis in kind of the transition from Memorial Stadium to Camden Yards?
Not that day, but I was afterwards. The idea, if you remember, the lease at Memorial Stadium had a rather convoluted rent arrangement, which not many people understood, but they were fascinated by it. So Ed said I should stay home. He didn't want to because they knew I knew it, and they didn't want me to get sucked into that conversation. So I wasn't at that meeting, but I spent a lot of time with Herb Belgrad and Gene Feinblatt and Larry Lucchino as we hammered out what I guess was just a memorandum of understanding that Ed signed before he died. So I mean, that's a short sentence. That was a lot of time and energy put into that.
So the lease, was that the 2 years plus 1 year that you're saying earlier? Could you explain what the lease really was?
2 leases. There was a lease at Memorial Stadium. That was a 2-year term that then ended up becoming a 1 year, with a 1 year option, and we just kept exercising that 1 year option. So we were on a short fuse at Memorial Stadium. While we were occupying the stadium and playing baseball there, we were negotiating the bigger lease for what became Oriole Park in a whole separate exercise.
Do you remember, this might be a little specific, the day that Camden Yards and Oriole Park was really, like, that site was first kind of brought up as this is where we want to be?
Not exactly. It kind of evolved. It was a site with the warehouse. There was another, there was always the possibility of tearing Memorial Stadium down and doing it there. Trying to think if there was another site, but no, I don't remember the exact date where that came up, or who actually came up with that idea. My guess is the city came up with the idea. It was their site, so, but I don't know.
So, when you think of Camden Yards, who do you attribute the design to? Who do you think should get the credit for designing the ballpark?
Success has 1,000 fathers. I would give it to Larry Lucchino. I mean, he had the vision for it. He could see there was a whole debate about whether we should tear the warehouse down or not. He was adamantly against that. He spent a lot of time touring these facilities all over the country. And then he and I spent a lot of time creating, which I think became a fundamental building block to making that stadium what it is today, is we solicited from the 3 big architectural groups, who aren't the 3 big architectural groups anymore because they all move around, but we created a document called the Minimum Requirements for a Stadium at Camden Yards, because we were convinced that once this began to unfold, that the mayor, who then became the governor, would give the store away to get a football team. And we were happy to participate, but we wanted to get the baseball stadium that we thought we deserved. And in fact, in that baseball stadium lease was a most favored nations clause. So if in fact they gave the store away for a football team, then those benefits would also accrue to the baseball team.
So what do you mean by the store?
Make it so attractive that anybody with a football team couldn't resist it. So it's a dynamic that happens in a lot of cities. You have an incumbent, and they want to keep you, and they want to do things that are nice, and then they have somebody they need to attract. And the business deal for the group they want to attract is undoubtedly 10 times better than the one they're offering you to stay. And we wanted to have the benefit. If in fact that happened, we weren't saying it would, it did, but if in fact it happened, we wanted the baseball team to have those benefits.
So how involved with this process was Williams, or was this really you and the Keno kind of doing most of this?
We kept, Ed was chairman of the board. We kept Ed apprised, no surprises, but he was not involved by the hour, by any means. He practiced law. I mean, remember, he had a 80-hour-a-week job that, was essential that he kept doing that.
So
we had access to him. Our offices were in his office. If we had a problem, we could get to him, but he was not sitting with us day in and day out.
So he wasn't, how do you think, how aware of the design of Camden Yards do you think he was, and kind of just that old, did he have any comments about it, or was he just really more focused on his other job?
He was aware. At that point in time, it was only sketches, right? So we signed that memo of understanding in May of '88, and he died in August of '88. So by the time there was any real architectural drawings, he was not there to absorb them. But so he would have seen schematic designs from 3 architectural firms. In a couple-hour sessions, he would have said, yeah, maybe no, maybe yes. Remember, he grew up in New England. He had a Fenway Park in the back of his mind. So the nostalgia part of all of this appealed to him. But he was not there saying 2 tiers or 3 tiers, how many boxes, et cetera.
So what do you think your biggest lesson is that you take away kind of from the move from Memorial Stadium to Camden Yards?
Well, you have to protect yourself. It's a lesson on multiple fronts. Lesson in politics, because the politicians, and I don't mean any ill will towards them, but they will take the signature on a piece of paper as a done deal and move on. And you have to learn that the memo of understanding signature was important, kind of made the whole thing work, but the amount of work and time and energy and effort that has to go into that to make it a reality is enormous. And by and large unappreciated. Not that I'm looking for a gold star, but by and large unappreciated. And remember, I was gone by then. I was not part of that, but I saw it, and Larry and I were very good friends. So he kept me in touch with it and asked me what I thought from time to time. So I was aware of it. But I think the lesson is that you have to have your story straight, your ducks in a row. You have to treat your political partners straight up. There's no kind of, playing some kind of side game with them, which goes to the point where we weren't going to meet with Modell without them being there. So that was important. And I think, other than that, lots of lessons that you learned along the way just from being around smart people like Ed Williams and Larry Lucchino.
Were there any other moments with politicians that kind of stand out to you in the memorial to Camden Yards?
So Williams and Schaefer had a really interesting relationship. I think in the end they were friends, but always a little, can you top this? So I do remember a face-to-face meeting in the mayor's office at 7:30 the morning after Christmas, which involved we need to have a meeting, when we got the meeting, so it's like, those were kind of interesting things, but I think by and large they were pretty good friends.
So do you think in the beginning they were kind of more less friendly just because of the climate of the Colts leaving and it being charged, and just over time working together they became?
Yeah, I think the mayor, I probably feel the same way where I was in his shoes, never got over that. Hard to get over, by the way, but he never got over that. And all of a sudden, he looks up, and the guy that owns the Orioles doesn't live there. And so he had to come to his own reconciliation about that. And initially, that was a tad rocky.
So moving forward up to opening day, where were you on opening day of Camden Yards?
Oh, I was there. Yeah.
What were you doing?
I was. So time. Time goes in circles, right? So when Ed died in 1988, I became the trustee of his estate, and I sold all those assets for his wife and his family, including the team. And then I went to work for one of my accounting firm clients from way back, who happened to be Clark Construction, who built Camden Yards. So I was in the building, went to the party the night before, but as a Clark guy, not as an Oriole guy.
If you don't mind me asking, how did Eli Jacobs, how did he become the one that you sold the team to?
We had a process. I prefer to not tell you who was in. You can probably read some of the articles. None of them are right. I learned from that most of the people, and these numbers weren't anywhere near the numbers that they are today, but there was still a lot of money. So most of the people who were well-heeled enough to envision themselves owning a baseball team, more than wanting to win the baseball team, they did not want to be perceived as a loser in a process. So I had 4 or 5 different parties, and every one of them said, I'm only going to do this. I'll come in and do all the work, but I don't want to hear about it if I lost. So we had lost a few along the way, but we had 3 different parties come to the table with bids, and Eli's number was the highest. Pretty simple. And Eli had a sordid past afterwards. I remember the Wall Street Journal calling me up a couple of years later when Eli started running into trouble, and they wanted to talk to me about it. How did it go? What was going on? I said, he came, he signed the deal. He came to closing on the appropriate hour with the right amount of money. We were done. So I found him to be a pleasure to deal with.
So besides talking with Larry Lucchino at the time, did you have any other involvement, or were you completely separate from the Orioles?
No, I was separate because I had talked to Ed and Agnes Williams. Agnes has now passed away. In their, I remember this, in their living room, and he was quite ill. And he knew what was percolating because Larry was getting ready to join Eli and try to buy the team. And he gave me a choice. He said, no hard feelings. If you want to go with them, go ahead. But you can't help her and go with them. So you need to make a choice. And I decided to stay with Mrs. Williams, and I never looked back from that.
So now, back again to opening day.
Yeah.
What did you think of Camden Yards in all of its glory for the first time?
I thought it was pretty good. I thought it was pretty cool. I thought it was, I think it was completely devoted and aligned to that document we put together about the minimum requirements. They had made all the minimum requirements and then some. And I thought it held together quite well. I thought one of the essential things we carried from Memorial Stadium to Camden Yards was the fact that in that this city police uptown, state police in Camden Yards, but the police presence in the stadium, it's very subtle, but it leads to a much more harmonic and family environment than if you have the University of Maryland rugby team providing security. It's just a different level. And they had adhered to all of that. And I was not a big proponent, by the way, of the warehouse. I'm a numbers guy. I thought the warehouse wouldn't work economically. I've never gone back and looked, but I'm almost positive I was right. But aesthetically, it was the right answer. And it's kind of made that work. And I always think that day particularly, but anytime I've been back, and I'm still a baseball fan, I go periodically to different places. But Camden Yards has the ability to make you weep. There's others that don't. I mean, Nats Park, nice place, no tears, right? I mean, Pittsburgh, nice place, okay, right? This thing has something to it that really kind of puts a tear in your eye when you go and watch it every time. And I think that was part of the magic that really came about it. And that's part of what Larry was looking for. I mean, he was fierce about that.
So you said financially, you still don't think the warehouse is really the right choice. Did you bring that up?
Time and time again.
Was that a big fight with Larry Lucchino? Or?
I don't think he ever heard me. So, no. I mean, it was. He knew where I stood and understood it, and but obviously, he prevailed.
So, do you remember who you were sitting with on opening day? Or?
I was probably there with my wife.
And
as I said, she was a baseball fan. I was never going to get to go without her. So.
Was she keeping the scorecard? Or?
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah. So.
And really, one of my final questions is: was that opening day different than any of the other opening days you've been to, just because of the new ballpark?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, opening day in baseball is a big deal. Often thought at times it was a little overdone. It's like 42 degrees. We have 162 more of these to play. And it's in the end, it's a game, right? It's one of many. But yeah, in that case, it was a not just an opening of the baseball season, but a opening of a new day, a new era in the city and the state, frankly. So there was lots to be celebrated, and appropriately so. That was a big deal, and pulling that off. I'm giving Larry all the credit, and he deserves it. But I go back to what I said: the things that go on that nobody ever saw, the coordination with the state, the permits, the fire, safety, sewers, all that stuff has to be coordinated at a very high level. And the time frame, I'd have to get my calendar out. We opened in '92. I'm not sure there was a lease involved until '89, maybe. I mean, that's a pretty quick turnaround to build a facility like that and have it come off as perfect as it did. So there's a lot of unsung heroes in all of this that without that wouldn't have happened.
Was there anything that I didn't ask that you think I should have?
We talked about Schaefer, the Modell meeting. I think that was it. It's an interesting time. I've been involved in a lot of development projects since then, and it never ceases to amaze me how, the so-called is a buzzword today in the business, the public-private partnership. If you want an example of one that didn't work, look up the purple line. This is one that did work. This was public land, private enterprise coming in there, working together, and pulling something off that was really quite special. And again, I don't want to stop this, but without recognizing Jean Feinblatt has passed away, Herb Belgrad's passed away, Allison Asti, who I think is still with us. Those were people from the state side that pulled all the right levers to make this happen.
And final question was, how do you think Camden Yards has kind of changed the landscape for what is a ballpark?
Oh, I think it's become the benchmark. I think people measure anything new, particularly in the baseball genre, right? The football stuff is different, but I think it's become the benchmark of does it work or not? Is it good enough? And I think that's a tribute to everybody who had anything to do with it.